Hello, good afternoon. Welcome back to Jess Honori for day 8 of Ghost Variations. Yesterday, in episode 7, we travelled with Yeli and her family to Dorset, and she's still there, looking back at her past life over the cliffs. After many sleepless hours, despite the countryside tranquillity, Yeli got up early and took Caesar the dog for a walk. He had spent the night in a strange kennel and deserved a treat. She wandered with him up the hill to the headland, and there, perched on a rock close to the edge, listening to the waves below. Yeli could rarely hear the sea without imagining Sep Kelly crossing it, whether in life towards the killing fields of northern France, or perhaps equally in death. She had dreamed that night in 1916 of a ship setting out into the ocean with no destination. She thought nothing of it. Someone had written to her telling her that Sep was fine and that he was writing her a new piece. He was already dead, as she heard 10 days later when his sister Maisie came to the house to tell her, weeping and incoherent. Yeli wept with her, then scarcely stopped crying for a month. Nobody knew what to say to her. Sep had never spoken one word of love, let alone proposed marriage, yet everyone thought them virtually engaged. They had spent much time together, but as duo partners, never lovers. When they met, out came her violin, up went the piano lid, and off they went to work. They communicated better through music than most couples do through touch. She would signal a nuance with a breath, an inclination of her head, or a slowing of her bow arm, and he, despite looking straight ahead at the music on the stand, would sense her need and meet it at once. They never played anything the same way twice. If conversation was fun, musical dialogue was even more so, transforming a Mozart sonata into mutual teasing, or Brahms into a shared moment of emotional eloquence that they never tried to replicate in real life. At least Sep did not, however much Yeli wished he would. He was still at the piano. On the Beckstein at Netherton Grove stood the John Singer Sargent sketch, showing the broad forehead and forthright gaze of a scholar, plus the thick-set neck of a rowing champion. She wasn't sure what had happened to Sep's gold medal from the 1908 London Olympic Games. Perhaps Maisie had kept it, or sent it home to their parents in Sydney. She had had admirers, suitors, lovers, though never Sep. He'd never even tried to touch her. Perhaps he didn't want to. Ardila thought he preferred men, but Yeli tried to stop her ears to that notion. Instead, Shud had to deal with Tovey, who once uttered a painful declaration, awkward and red-faced, making her squirm, much as she adored him. Anyway, she was sure he spent longer pursuing Maisie. There was Bartok, who first fell for Ardila and later for Yeli, and came to their Budapest house almost every day for 5 years, which mightily embarrassed them. The cruel young girls they were then thought only that he had no sense of humour. Elgar, who termed her his 10th muse, tried to kiss her after taking her to the British Museum, which she was too young and innocent to know was a popular den for assignations, and he was 35 years her senior and an Order of Merit too. In one stroke he had wrecked any chance that she would ever play his interminable violin concerto. And poor dear Tom, the best of them, if she could have felt as strongly for him as she did for Sep. She could still hear the first sound of Sep's arrival in her life, his fancy car pulling up outside Donald Tovey's home in Surrey one glorious May morning full of shouting birds and lilac blossom. Cars were uncommon in those days, so the arrival of a noisy engine on a sleek machine meant that every schoolboy in Englefield Green came running out to stare and point. You know at once when you meet someone who will change your life, even if you have no idea how it will happen. Yeli knew at one glance that Sep would, but the first thing he did was to laugh at her. People did then, before she was famous enough to be more than one of those darling Hungarian sisters. Hortense, sweating with nerves at her piano, was a fragile beauty. Ardila, the eldest, was the powerhouse violinist, pupil of the great Joachim. But Yeli was the baby, the one with the gypsy looks and the silly name. "Where did you get that name then?" Sepp challenged her, sipping Tovy's tea. Most English people were too polite to ask outright, but Sepp, for all his Eton schooling and Oxford scholarship, was an outsider, as Yeli was herself. His Australian accent clung to him like bathing trunks. Despite, or perhaps because of, the English high society into which he'd tumbled by design of his father's money, but distinctly by accident where his own nature was concerned. "I was named after an African princess." Yeli raised her chin, trying to look taller. "Someone my father met when a group from Dahomey came to Budapest." "There was an African princess called Yeli. There's a trifle unlikely, isn't it?" Sepp teased her, those 50-carat blue eyes sparkling into her teenage face. "I've heard all the jokes before, you know. Jelly, trifle, ice cream, getting my just desserts. It is very tedious." "Then I shall just have to be more original, shan't I? Tell me more about this African princess." "I think it was originally spelled Jeli, but our father wanted to make it look English. I don't think he had the first idea what it meant. And it's Yeli, not Jelly. Though I must say I am not in the habit of yelling very much." She saw the corners of Sepp's eyes crinkle and his teeth glimmer as she battled with the Hungarian twists of her vocal cords. They seemed to be stronger than she was. "You could change it, you know. You could choose any name you like." "But I do like it. I have a name nobody else in this country has ever had. Why would I want one that belonged to someone else first? It would be, how do you say in English, second-hand." Sepp laughed, a deep, raucous Australian laugh, his head on one side. He evidently thought she was a poppet, as everyone seemed to. Yeli was furious that she wasn't even 2 years older, which could have made all the difference. He was nearly 30 and awfully venerable. "Tell me about yourself then," he said. "Start with your name and tell me something I can't guess about what you think and feel." Yeli pondered. "My name is Yeli von Aranyi, and—" "Go on," he prompted. "And I know that—" "My name is Yeli von Aranyi, and I know that nobody has ever had my name before." She was emboldened. "Nobody else has ever had my name. Nobody else has ever lived my life." "And live it you do and you shall," he laughed. "I can see that in the way you set your jaw." "That's probably from the violin." "Of course you play the violin, don't you?" He stopped laughing. "The Tove's been yelling Yeli's praises. Come on, let's see what you can do. What shall we play?" "Brahms." "Brahms? You play Brahms? That's no music for little girls." Yeli fumed. "Try me." "All right then." He suggested the second sonata, the most concentrated and supposedly straightforward of Brahms's 3. Yeli refused. She plumped for the third in D minor, the last, loudest and most violent. Best of all, it had a pig of a piano part. Yeli flung herself into the melodies and gave Sepp at the keyboard a run she hoped he would never forget. "Wait for me," he shouted as she galloped into the finale. He was an Olympic champion. He should be able to keep up. She flew on, gaze unbendable, challenging him. By the end, he was sweating more than she was. A crash of applause surprised them. Getting their breath, they found Tovy, Hortense, Ardila and their mother, all watching with widened eyes and mouths. Yeli laughed. Sepp joined her. She had made him follow her lead, thus far. Come on, Sepp, take a breath, Tovey advised, clapping a hand onto his shoulder. Let me have a go. Game of chess? Sepp suggested. Absolutely. Tovey sat down at the piano and began to play the first prelude and fugue from Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. Sepp grabbed the chess set from the bookcase, an inlaid board full of mother of pearl and contrasting bright woods, and set out the pieces. He flipped a coin. Heads! Shouted Tovey from the piano without missing a note. Yeli stared, amazed. You can't play the piano and chess at the same time, she exclaimed. Nuffin' nonsense, said Tovey. Watch me. It's tails. I'll take white, said Sepp. Tovey started on the C minor prelude and fugue as Sepp made his first move and called it out to the professor, who considered deeply, Bach rattling out under his fingers before responding, pawn, G4. They might do this for hours, Adela whispered to the startled Yeli. Let's go outside. Yeli could have stayed and watched the slope of Sepp's neck and shoulders, muscular from rowing, and his beautiful hands while he controlled both ends of the game, shouting his moves to Tovey and receiving decisions back while the professor played from memory through the entire first book of the Bach 48 Preludes and Fugues, then started on the second. Since Sepp, she had never felt the same about anybody else, and she saw no reason to compromise. Probably Tom had never married because he was waiting for her. And she had waited too, waited for her emotions to fasten upon him for sure and for all time. They both kept waiting and waiting, when, if it were going to happen, it would probably have done so on the day they met. About a week after she heard that Sepp had been killed at the Somme, Yeli, who had sunk into an arid subterranean world of mourning, woke around 2 a.m. Suspended in a state of semi-dream, as if she were hovering as a spirit over her own body, curled alone in her bed, she thought she heard... what? She knew it. What was it? The opening melody of Sepp's violin sonata. He'd written it for her in his head, in between digging trenches and dodging Ottoman ammunition. Then he'd written it down on the boat leaving Gallipoli after the horrors of battle. It began with a strong theme full of nobility and poise. But what she heard in her mind's ear now seemed to reach her from the other side of a distant sea, as if in the scraping of a beginner violinist, as Sepp, a pianist, would have been. The sort of valiant try that goes straight for the nerves under your teeth. Sepp had not said goodbye to her before he left for France. Was that his farewell? Yeli came too, the sound scratching away inside her head. She felt exhausted even before she could stand. Back at the hotel, after breakfast, Yeli resumed her place at the desk overlooking the lawn to begin writing to people who might help her start hunting for the Schumann manuscript, notably Tovey, taking time to ensure that language and handwriting were logical and legible and would not frighten away her targets. She scarcely noticed the hours pass. It was only when a bark reached her, high-pitched officious, unquestionably Caesar's, that she realised her companions were nowhere to be seen. Beyond the window she glimpsed the flash of Adrienne's lilac dress and the gleam of her mahogany hair, while the dog galloped by chasing a bull. Adri? Yeli went onto the terrace. Where are Mummy and Daddy and Uncle Eric? Adrienne shielded her eyes from the sun with one hand. They went to the beach. Without you? Mummy said it's a beach that children and dogs can't go to, so we should stay here and you'd look after us. Not that we need looking after, you know, but that's what she said. She didn't want to disturb you because you were busy. Oh, said Yeli. I see. So, Adila, Eric and Alec had gone together à trois to that beach leaving her to babysit. And without telling her, because they thought she was too busy to listen, or perhaps because they didn't want to explain. Yeli felt briefly floored. But this was not something to tell the blissfully innocent and dog-focused Adri. She placed her outgoing letters on the hotel's post pile, then went into the sunshine to play with her niece. Thank you very much. That's the end of today's episode. Tomorrow we will be back to meet Myra Hess.